The smoke billowing from the kitchen window of the small homestead outside Bozeman, Montana territory in 1883 told Samuel Reed everything he needed to know before he even reached the front door. Samuel had been tracking elk through the pine forests when he spotted the dark plumes rising above the valley, and his instinct sent him running toward what he assumed was a dangerous fire. His long legs covered the distance quickly, his muscular frame moving with surprising grace for a man of his size. His dark hair, which fell past his shoulders, whipped behind him as he ran. When he burst through the door of the modest cabin, he found a young woman frantically waving a dish towel at the smoke pouring from the cast-iron stove, her face streaked with soot and tears. "Get back!" Samuel shouted, rushing past her to grab the smoking pan with his bare hands, hissing as the heat seared his calloused palms. He threw the pan outside into a snowbank where it landed with a sizzle. The charred remains of what might have once been intended as biscuits scattered across the white powder like blackened stones. The young woman stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen, her chest heaving with panicked breaths. She was perhaps 22 or 23, with auburn hair pulled back in a loose bun that had come partially undone during her battle with the stove. Her green eyes were wide with mortification as she stared at the stranger who had just saved her home from burning down. "Are you hurt?" Samuel asked, his deep voice gentler now as he looked her over for injuries. His sharp blue eyes scanned her carefully, and noting the flour dusted across her simple calico dress and the small burn mark on her sleeve. "No, I'm fine," she managed to say, her voice shaking. "Thank you. I did not realize anyone was nearby. I thought I was alone out here." Samuel noticed an older woman rushing in from the back room, her face pale with alarm. "Catherine! What happened? I only stepped away for a moment to fetch more wood." "Aunt Mabel, I am so sorry," Catherine said, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I was trying to make breakfast. I thought I could manage the biscuits on my own this time, but the fire got too hot and then the dough started smoking, and I panicked." Mabel pressed her hand to her forehead and sighed deeply. "She cannot cook a single meal," she said to Samuel, as if he were a longtime confidant rather than a complete stranger. "Not one. I have tried teaching her for 3 months now, and everything she touches turns to ash or remains raw in the middle. I despair that she will ever learn." Catherine's face flushed crimson, and she looked down at her soot-covered hands. "I am trying, Aunt Mabel. I truly am." Samuel felt an unexpected pang of sympathy for the young woman. He cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I am Samuel Reed. I have a cabin about 5 miles north of here, up in the high country. I was hunting when I saw the smoke." "Mabel Thornton," the older woman said, recovering her composure. "And this is my niece, Catherine Thornton. She came out here from Philadelphia after her parents passed last winter. Consumption took them both within weeks of each other." "I am sorry for your loss," Samuel said to Catherine, and he meant it. He knew what it was like to lose family. His own parents had died years ago, his father in a mining accident, and his mother from grief shortly after. Catherine finally met his eyes, and Samuel felt something shift in his chest. There was a vulnerability in her gaze that made him want to protect her, to shield her from the harshness of this wild territory. "Thank you, Mr. Reed," she said softly, "and thank you for saving our home. I would never have forgiven myself if my incompetence had caused real damage." "You are not incompetent," Samuel found himself saying. "Cooking on a wood stove takes practice, especially at this altitude. The air is thinner here, and fires burn differently than back east." Mabel snorted. "That may be true, but Catherine cannot seem to boil water without incident. Just yesterday she managed to burn soup. Soup! I did not know such a thing was possible until I witnessed it myself." Catherine looked like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. Samuel felt his protective instincts surge stronger. "Perhaps she just needs a different teacher," he said carefully. "Someone with more patience." Mabel's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, her expression suddenly shifted to one of cunning interest. "Mr. Reed, can you cook?" Samuel blinked at the unexpected question. "Yes, ma'am. A man living alone in the mountains learns to cook or he starves. I manage well enough." "Then perhaps you would stay for breakfast?" Mabel said, her tone now honey-sweet. "I would make it myself, but my rheumatism is acting up something fierce this morning. The cold aggravates my joints terribly." Samuel glanced at Catherine. who was shaking her head frantically behind her aunt's back, clearly mortified by the woman's transparent attempt at matchmaking. But Samuel found himself intrigued despite the obvious manipulation. "I suppose I could make breakfast," he said slowly, "if you have supplies." "Oh, we have plenty," Mabel said brightly. "Catherine, show Mr. Reed where everything is kept. I will just rest my poor joints in the sitting room." She bustled away before either of them could protest, leaving Samuel and Catherine alone in the smoke-scented kitchen. An awkward silence stretched between them. Catherine finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You do not have to do this. My aunt means well, but she's been trying to find me a husband since I arrived. She thinks a woman alone is a tragedy waiting to happen." "Is she wrong?" Samuel asked, not unkindly. "This is hard country, Miss Thornton, especially for someone not used to it." Catherine lifted her chin, showing a flash of spirit. "I am learning. I may not be able to cook, but I can mend clothes better than anyone in the valley. I can read and write and do figures. I have been helping keep the books for the general store in town, and Mr. Peterson says I have a real talent for it." Samuel felt a smile tug at his lips. "I did not mean to imply you were useless, only that having help is not a sign of weakness." She studied him for a long moment, and Samuel was aware of how he must look, his buckskin clothing worn and stained from weeks in the wilderness, his face covered with several days of beard growth, his hair wild and unkempt. He was not the sort of man a refined Eastern lady would typically entertain. Very well," Catherine said finally. "If you truly do not mind cooking, I would appreciate it. I'm quite hungry, and I confess I have no idea what to do now that I have burned our breakfast." Samuel moved to the stove, checking the firebox and adjusting the dampers with practiced ease. "Do you have eggs, bacon, flour that has not been turned to smoke?" Catherine actually smiled at that, and Samuel felt his heart skip in a way it had not done in years. "Yes to all three. Let me show you our pantry." As she led him to the small room off the kitchen, Samuel found himself very aware of her presence beside him. She smelled like lavender soap and wood smoke, an oddly appealing combination. He had to remind himself that he was here to cook breakfast, nothing more. But as he worked at the stove, mixing batter for pancakes and frying thick strips of bacon in a clean skillet, he was conscious of Catherine watching him from the table where she sat. She did not speak, but her eyes followed his every movement with intense concentration. "You are watching me like I am performing surgery," Samuel said, glancing over his shoulder at her. "I am trying to learn," Catherine said earnestly. "If I watch someone skilled, perhaps I can understand what I'm doing wrong." Samuel felt another tug of sympathy. He remembered his own mother teaching him to cook when he was just a boy, her patient hands guiding his as he learned to judge when meat was done or how to keep eggs from sticking to the pan. "Come here," he said impulsively. "Watching will only teach you so much. You need to feel it." Catherine stood hesitantly and approached the stove. Samuel moved slightly to the side, making room for her beside him. "See how the bacon is starting to curl at the edges? That means it is almost ready to turn. You want to flip it before the edges get too dark, or it will be tough." He handed her the long fork he had been using. Catherine took it with trembling fingers. "I'm going to ruin it," she whispered. "You will not. I am right here." Samuel's voice was low and reassuring. He guided her hand with his own, helping her slide the fork under a strip of bacon and flip it smoothly. The meat sizzled as its raw side hit the hot iron. "There, see? You did it." Catherine looked up at him with such genuine delight that Samuel felt his breath catch. This close, he could see the gold flecks in her green eyes and the light dusting of freckles across her nose. "I did do it," she said, her whole face brightening. "That is the first thing I have cooked that has not immediately caught fire or turned to rubber." Samuel chuckled, a deep rumbling sound that surprised even himself. He had not laughed much in recent years, not since he had retreated to his mountain cabin after his fiancée back in Denver had broken their engagement, unable to imagine life in the wilderness with a man who preferred solitude to society. "That is progress," he agreed. "Now let us finish the rest before your aunt comes to check on us." They worked side by side, and Samuel found himself enjoying the companionship more than he had expected. Catherine was a quick study when she was not panicking, and she listened carefully to his instructions. By the time they had a platter of golden pancakes, crispy bacon, and scrambled eggs ready to serve, she was flushed with pride at having helped create an edible meal. Mabel emerged from the sitting room with suspiciously perfect timing, her rheumatism apparently forgotten. "My goodness, that smells wonderful," she declared. "Mr. Reed, you are a marvel. Catherine, did you help at all?" "She did," Samuel said before Catherine could downplay her contribution. "She cooked the bacon herself, did a fine job of it too." Catherine's grateful look made his heart do that strange skipping thing again. They sat down at the small table, and Mabel said grace before they ate. The food was good, hot, and filling, and Samuel found himself relaxing in the warm kitchen, enjoying the simple pleasure of sharing a meal with others. He had been alone too long, he realized. The isolation that had once seemed like freedom now felt more like exile. "Mr. Reed," Mabel said as she buttered a pancake, "what brings you to this particular part of Montana territory? You said you live in the mountains, but that covers a considerable amount of ground." Samuel swallowed his bite of eggs. "I came here about 4 years ago. I worked as a logger for a while, then did some trapping and hunting. I built my cabin and have been living off the land mostly, selling furs and meat to the trading posts when I need supplies." "That sounds like a lonely existence," Mabel observed, her eyes sharp. "It suits me," Samuel said simply, though he was no longer entirely certain that was true. "Do you never want for company? For a family?" Mabel pressed, undeterred. "Aunt Mabel," Catherine said, scandalized, "that is hardly appropriate dinner conversation with a stranger." "Mr. Reed saved our home," Mabel said primly. "That makes him more than a stranger. Besides, I am too old to dance around topics. Life is short, especially out here." Samuel found himself appreciating the older woman's directness, even if her matchmaking was transparent. "I did want those things once," he admitted. "They did not work out. I made peace with it." Catherine was looking at him with such open sympathy that Samuel had to glance away. He was not accustomed to being seen so clearly by anyone. "What about you, Miss Thornton?" he asked, deflecting attention from himself. "What brought you to Montana territory? Besides your parents' passing, I mean. You could have stayed in Philadelphia." Catherine set down her fork. "There was nothing left for me there. My parents were my only family, except for Aunt Mabel. The house had to be sold to pay debts, and I had no means of supporting myself. I worked briefly as a seamstress, but the pay was barely enough to cover a room in a boarding house. When Aunt Mabel wrote and offered me a home here, it seemed like an opportunity for a fresh start." "Do you like it here?" Samuel asked, genuinely curious. Catherine considered the question carefully. "It is beautiful," she said finally. "I love the mountains and the vast sky. Everything feels bigger here, more alive somehow. But it is also frightening sometimes. I worry constantly that I am not strong enough for this life, that I will be a burden on my aunt rather than a help." "You are not a burden," Mabel said firmly. "You are family, and you are stronger than you think, child. You just need confidence." Samuel found himself nodding in agreement. "Your aunt is right. Strength is not just about physical capability. It is about courage, and it takes real courage to leave everything you know and start over in a strange place." Catherine's eyes met his, and Samuel saw gratitude and something else in her gaze, something that made his pulse quicken. He reminded himself sternly that he barely knew this woman, that he had come here by accident, that he would be leaving soon to return to his solitary cabin. Getting entangled with anyone, especially someone as clearly unsuited to mountain life as Catherine Thornton, would be foolish. But even as he thought it, he knew he was trying to convince himself of something his heart was already rebelling against. They finished breakfast, and Samuel helped clean up despite Mabel's protests. Catherine washed the dishes while he dried them, and they fell into an easy rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. When the kitchen was spotless once more, Samuel knew he should take his leave. He had already been away from his trap lines longer than intended. "I should be going," he said reluctantly. "I have work to do, and I am sure you ladies have your own tasks to attend to." "Must you leave so soon?" Mabel asked, though her tone suggested she had expected nothing else. "We have enjoyed your company, Mr. Reed." "The feeling is mutual, ma'am." Samuel picked up his rifle from where he had leaned it against the wall. He looked at Catherine, who was standing with her hands folded in front of her, looking uncertain. "Miss Thornton, I hope you will not be too discouraged about your cooking. Everyone learns at their own pace." "Thank you, Mr. Reed," Catherine said softly. For everything. For saving our home, for breakfast, and for your kindness." Samuel nodded and headed for the door, but before he could leave, Mabel spoke up again. "Mr. Reed, would you consider visiting again? Perhaps for supper later this week. I would enjoy hearing more about life in the high country, and I am sure Catherine would benefit from more cooking instruction." Samuel knew he should decline. He knew he should walk out that door and return to his simple, solitary life. But when he glanced back at Catherine and saw the hope in her eyes, he found himself saying, "I would like that, ma'am. How about Saturday evening?" "Saturday would be perfect," Mabel said, beaming. "We will expect you around 6 o'clock if that suits you." 6 o'clock, Samuel agreed. He gave them both a final nod and stepped out into the cold morning air. As he walked back toward the tree line where he had left his gear, he could not stop thinking about green eyes and auburn hair and a smile that had made him feel something he had thought long dead. The next few days passed slowly for Samuel. He checked his trap lines, finding several prime beaver pelts that would fetch good money at the trading post. He hunted and smoked meat for winter storage. He repaired a section of his cabin roof that had been damaged by the last heavy snow. All the normal tasks of his life, yet his mind kept wandering back to the Thornton homestead and the young woman who could not cook a single meal without disaster. He tried to tell himself that his interest was simply neighborly concern. The Thornton women were isolated out here with no man to protect them or help with the heavier tasks. It was only decent to check on them occasionally. But Samuel knew he was lying to himself. He had passed other isolated homesteads without feeling compelled to stop. There was something about Catherine specifically that drew him, something beyond simple attraction. Saturday arrived cold and clear. Samuel spent extra time that morning grooming himself, trimming his beard and washing thoroughly in the icy stream near his cabin. He brushed out his long hair and tied it back with a leather cord. He changed into his cleanest buckskin shirt and pants, though he knew they were still rough by civilized standards. He debated bringing a gift and finally settled on a haunch of venison from the elk he had killed earlier in the week. Fresh meat was always welcome in winter. He arrived at the Thornton cabin precisely at 6 o'clock, his heart beating faster than it should for a simple supper invitation. Catherine answered his knock, and Samuel was struck again by how pretty she was. She had changed into a dress of deep blue wool that brought out the color of her eyes, and her hair was neatly pinned up with a few soft curls framing her face. "Mr. Reed," she said, her face lighting up, "please come in. We were starting to worry you might not come." "I said I would be here," Samuel replied, stepping inside and removing his hat. "I brought venison. I thought you might have use for it." "Oh, that is wonderful," Mabel called from the kitchen. "We have been eating mostly salt pork and beans. Fresh meat will be a real treat. Catherine, take Mr. Reed's coat." Catherine helped him out of his heavy fur-lined coat, her fingers brushing his briefly as she took it. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through Samuel. He followed her into the kitchen where Mabel was overseeing a pot on the stove. "I thought tonight we could teach Catherine to make a proper stew," Mabel announced. "It is simple enough that even she should be able to manage it, and with your help, Mr. Reed, perhaps we can prevent any disasters." Catherine looked resigned to her aunt's teasing. "I promise to try my best not to burn the water this time," she said dryly. Samuel surprised himself by laughing. "A worthy goal. Miss Thornton, why do you not start by cutting up some vegetables? I will show you how to prepare the venison." They worked together again, and Samuel found himself enjoying the process even more than he had the first time. Catherine was more relaxed now, less afraid of making mistakes. When she cut the potatoes too large, Samuel gently showed her how to make them smaller without criticizing her error. When she added too much salt, he simply added more water and vegetables to balance it out. "You are a patient teacher," Mabel observed from her chair where she sat mending a shirt. Most men would have taken over completely by now. "What would be the point of that?" Samuel asked. "Miss Thornton needs to learn for herself. I'm just here to guide." "You hear that, Catherine?" Mabel said pointedly. "A patient man who can teach without criticizing. Those are rare qualities." "Aunt Mabel, please," Catherine said, though her cheeks were pink. Samuel diplomatically focused on the stew, stirring the pot and explaining to Catherine how to judge when meat was tender and vegetables were cooked through. The kitchen filled with rich, savory aromas, and by the time they sat down to eat, Samuel was genuinely proud of what Catherine had accomplished. "I made this," Catherine said wonderingly, staring at her bowl of stew. "I actually made food that looks edible." "You did," Samuel confirmed. "With help, yes, but you did the work. Taste it." Catherine took a tentative spoonful, and her eyes widened. "It is good. It is actually good." Mabel tasted her own bowl and nodded approvingly. "Well done, child. Perhaps there is hope for you yet." They ate together, the conversation flowing easily. Samuel told them stories of his life in the mountains, of tracking bears and wolves, of nights so cold his beard froze solid, of summer days when wildflowers carpeted entire meadows with color. Catherine told him about Philadelphia, about attending theater performances and walking in formal gardens, about the crush of crowds and noise that she had once thought she could never live without. "Do you miss it?" Samuel asked. "The city life?" Catherine considered this. "I miss some things. I miss bookshops and concerts. I miss being able to walk down a street and see dozens of people. But I do not miss the dirt and the noise and the constant press of humanity. Here, the silence feels clean somehow. Does that make sense?" "It does," Samuel said, understanding exactly what she meant. "That is why I came to the mountains. After my parents died and my engagement ended, I could not stand being surrounded by people anymore. Every face reminded me of what I had lost. Out here, I could breathe again." "Your engagement ended?" Catherine asked softly. "I'm sorry." That must have been painful." Samuel shrugged, trying to appear casual. "It was for the best. Rebecca wanted a husband who would take over her father's mercantile business in Denver. She wanted a big house in town and children raised with every advantage. I could not be that man. I tried for her sake, but I was miserable. When I finally admitted I wanted to live in the wilderness, she called off the wedding, said she would not waste her youth on a man who preferred trees to people." "She sounds like a fool," Mabel said bluntly. "Begging your pardon, Mr. Reed, but any woman who cannot see the value in a skilled, hard-working man is not worth mourning." Samuel smiled despite himself. "Thank you, ma'am. I have made my peace with it, but it made me cautious about forming new attachments. I did not want to disappoint anyone else or be disappointed myself." He felt Catherine's eyes on him and looked up to meet her gaze. There was understanding there, and sympathy, but also something warmer. Samuel felt his carefully constructed defenses beginning to crack. After supper, Samuel helped clean up again, and then Mabel claimed she needed to retire early due to fatigue. Her theatrics were obvious, but Samuel could not bring himself to mind. She left him and Catherine alone in the sitting room with the fire crackling in the hearth. "My aunt is not subtle," Catherine said apologetically, settling into a chair near the fire. "I am sorry if her matchmaking makes you uncomfortable." Samuel took the other chair, stretching his long legs toward the warmth. "Does it make you uncomfortable?" Catherine blushed but met his eyes. "No," she admitted. "I know I should probably be offended on principle, but I am not. You are the first person since I came here who has treated me like I have potential rather than like I am a disaster waiting to happen." "You do have potential," Samuel said seriously. "Anyone can see that. You just need confidence and practice." "And apparently a mountain man to cook for me," Catherine said with a small smile. Samuel chuckled. "I do not mind cooking. I find it relaxing, actually. There is something satisfying about creating something nourishing from raw ingredients." They talked as the fire burned lower, conversation flowing easily from topic to topic. Samuel learned that Catherine loved reading, especially poetry and novels, though books were scarce in Montana territory. She learned that he had been educated by his mother, who had been a schoolteacher before she married, and that he had a passion for astronomy and spent clear nights studying the stars. "I would love to see the stars from your mountain cabin," Catherine said wistfully. "I imagine they must be spectacular from that altitude." "They are," Samuel agreed. "Far from any town lights, you can see the Milky Way so clearly it looks like a river of light across the sky. I have a telescope I built myself from plans in an old journal. It is crude, but functional." "You built a telescope?" Catherine's admiration was evident. "That is remarkable." Samuel felt embarrassed by her praise, but also pleased. It was something to do during the long winters. A man alone has to find ways to occupy his mind or go mad. Catherine sobered at that. "Do you get lonely? Truly?" Samuel considered lying, but found he could not to her. Sometimes, he admitted, more often lately than I used to. I think perhaps I have been alone long enough that the solitude has lost its appeal. What will you do about it? Catherine asked quietly. Samuel looked at her, at the firelight playing across her features, at the hope and uncertainty in her eyes. I'm not sure yet, he said honestly, but I'm starting to think I need to figure it out. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Samuel wanted to reach for her hand, to pull her into his arms, to kiss her, until neither of them could think straight. But it was too soon, too fast. He had to be certain of his own feelings before he risked entangling someone else in his complicated life. I should go, he said reluctantly, though it was the last thing he wanted to do. It is getting late, and I have a long walk back. Catherine stood when he did, disappointment flickering across her face before she masked it. Of course. Thank you for coming, Mr. Reed. Thank you for teaching me and for being so kind. Samuel, he said impulsively. Please call me Samuel. Samuel, Catherine repeated, and he loved the way his name sounded in her voice. Then you must call me Catherine. Catherine, Samuel said, testing it. He liked it even better than he had thought he would. I would like to come back if you will have me. Perhaps I could continue teaching you to cook. Or we could just talk. Whatever you prefer. Catherine's face brightened. I would like that very much. Would you come for Sunday dinner tomorrow? Aunt Mabel will be going to church in town, and I do not have the courage to attend yet. I know I should, but I feel like everyone stares at me. They probably do, Samuel said honestly. New people are rare enough out here that everyone takes notice, but they are mostly good folk. Give them time to get used to you, and they will stop staring. Will you come tomorrow? Catherine asked again, a hint of nervousness in her voice. Yes, Samuel agreed. I will come. They stood at the door, neither quite ready to say good night. Finally, Samuel forced himself to step out into the cold. Until tomorrow, Catherine. Until tomorrow, Samuel. He walked home through the darkness, navigating by starlight and long familiarity with the terrain. His mind was full of Catherine, of her smile and her laugh and the way she listened when he spoke, as if his words truly mattered. He was falling for her, he realized, with a mixture of excitement and terror. After years of solitude, of telling himself he was better off alone, he was falling in love with a woman who could not cook a single meal without disaster. The irony was not lost on him. His ex-fiancée had been accomplished in all the traditional womanly arts, skilled at cooking and sewing and managing a household. But she had never understood Samuel himself, never wanted the life he dreamed of. Catherine was hopeless in the kitchen and completely unprepared for frontier life, but she looked at him like he hung the moon, and when they talked, Samuel felt truly seen for the first time in years. He spent the next morning hunting turkeys, managing to bring down 2 fat hens that would make an excellent dinner. He plucked and cleaned them carefully, or then gathered wild herbs from a patch he had been cultivating near his cabin. He wanted tomorrow's meal to be special, though he tried not to examine too closely why that mattered so much to him. Sunday dawned clear and cold. Samuel made the journey to the Thornton cabin with butterflies in his stomach, like a green boy courting his first girl. He found Catherine alone as promised, Mabel having left early for the 6-mile trip into Bozeman. I brought turkey, Samuel announced, holding up the birds. I thought we could roast them with herbs and root vegetables. Catherine's smile was radiant. That sounds wonderful. I must confess I've been nervous all morning about being alone with you. Not because I fear you, she added hastily, but because I wanted so badly for today to go well. I have been nervous too, Samuel admitted. Why, setting the turkeys on the kitchen table. I could not sleep last night for thinking about seeing you again. The confession hung in the air between them. Catherine's eyes widened and color rose in her cheeks. Truly, she whispered. Truly, Samuel confirmed. He took a step toward her, drawn by something he could not resist. Catherine, I know we have only just met, and I know this is probably foolish, but I cannot stop thinking about you. You have turned my ordered life completely upside down in the space of 2 days. Catherine closed the distance between them, her hand coming to rest lightly on his chest. Samuel could feel his heart pounding under her palm. You have done the same to me, she said softly. I thought I would come here and learn to be strong and independent, to build a new life alone. I never expected to meet someone like you." Samuel covered her hand with his own, his calloused fingers rough against her soft skin. "Someone like me? A rough mountain man with more muscles than manners?" Catherine actually laughed. "Someone kind and patient and genuine. Someone who sees past my failures to whatever potential I might have. Someone who makes me feel safe and excited all at once." Samuel could not help himself any longer. He cupped her face with his free hand, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," Catherine breathed. "Please, yes." Samuel lowered his mouth to hers, kissing her with all the pent-up longing he had been trying to deny. Catherine melted against him, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck. She was soft and warm and perfect. And Samuel felt something click into place deep in his chest, something that had been misaligned for years, suddenly settling where it belonged. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "This is madness," he murmured. "We barely know each other." "Then we will get to know each other," Catherine said firmly. "I do not care if it is fast or unconventional. I have spent my whole life doing what was proper and expected, and where did it get me? Alone and frightened in a strange land. I want to be brave for once. I want to take a chance on something real." Samuel pulled her close, tucking her head under his chin and just holding her. She fit against him perfectly, as if she had been made to be in his arms. "I want that too," he admitted. "But Catherine, you need to understand what you would be getting into. My life is not easy. I live in a cabin with one room and a sleeping loft. In winter, I sometimes go weeks without seeing another person. There are no luxuries, no conveniences. It is beautiful, but it is hard." Catherine pulled back enough to look up at him. "Do you think I am afraid of hard work? Samuel, I may not be able to cook, but I am not helpless. I can learn, I can adapt. What I cannot do is go back to living a half-life, going through the motions without ever feeling truly alive. You make me feel alive." Samuel kissed her again, slower this time, savoring the moment. When he finally released her, he had to take a deep breath to steady himself. "We should cook that turkey," he said, "before your aunt returns and finds us in a compromising position." Catherine giggled. A sound so joyful that Samuel wanted to make her laugh like that every day for the rest of his life. They worked together to prepare the meal, and Samuel showed Catherine how to stuff the turkey with herbs and onions, how to truss the leg so it cooked evenly, how to arrange vegetables around it to roast in the drippings. "You are teaching me more than just cooking, are you not?" Catherine observed as she carefully placed carrots around the turkey under his guidance. "What do you mean?" Samuel asked. "You're teaching me patience and attention to detail and confidence." Catherine looked up at him. "No one else has ever taken the time to really teach me anything. They just got frustrated and took over. But you let me make mistakes and learn from them." "Mistakes are how we learn," Samuel said simply. I have made plenty of them in my life. The key is not to be afraid of them." They got the turkey into the oven, and then Samuel suggested they take a walk while it cooked. They bundled up against the cold and headed out into the brilliant winter afternoon. Samuel led Catherine to a spot he had noticed on his previous visits, a small rise that overlooked the valley with the mountains rising majestically in the distance. "Oh," Catherine breathed, taking in the view. "This is beautiful." "It is," Samuel agreed, though he was looking at her rather than the landscape. "Catherine, I need to tell you something. I am not a wealthy man. I make enough to live on, but there are no riches in my future. If you were to, that is, if we were to consider, he stumbled over his words, frustrated by his own awkwardness. Catherine took his hand, her fingers lacing through his. "Are you trying to ask if I would consider marrying you someday?" Samuel nodded, relieved that she understood. "Yes. Not right away, obviously. We need time to be sure. But I need to know if it is even a possibility in your mind. I do not want to pursue this if you are expecting something I cannot provide." Catherine turned to face him fully, her green eyes serious. "Samuel Reed, I do not need wealth. I grew up comfortable, yes, but my parents lost everything in the end anyway. Money does not guarantee security or happiness. What I need is someone who values me, who respects me, who wants to build a life together as partners. Can you offer me that?" Yes, Samuel said without hesitation. I can offer you all of that and more. I can offer you loyalty and protection and a home, simple though it may be. I can offer you my whole heart, Catherine, if you will have it. Tears sparkled in Catherine's eyes, but she was smiling. Then yes, someday I would very much like to marry you, though I think we should probably court properly for a while first, if only to avoid scandalizing Aunt Mabel. Samuel laughed and pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. Agreed, though something tells me your aunt will be delighted rather than scandalized. They stood there together, looking out over the valley, and Samuel felt more at peace than he had in years. He had found something he had not even known he was looking for, something worth coming down from his mountain for. When they returned to the cabin, the turkey was perfectly roasted, golden and fragrant. They had just finished setting the table when Mabel returned from church, stomping snow from her boots and calling out greetings. "Something smells wonderful," she announced, coming into the kitchen. She took one look at Samuel and Catherine, at their joined hands and the glow in their faces, and a satisfied smile spread across her features. "Well now, it seems my trip to town was well timed." "Aunt Mabel," Catherine began, but Mabel waved her off. "No need to explain, child. I have eyes in my head. Mr. Reed, I assume your intentions toward my niece are honorable?" "Completely, ma'am," Samuel assured her. "I have asked Catherine if she would consider courting with the possibility of marriage in the future. She has agreed, but we would like your blessing." Mabel looked him up and down appraisingly. "You are a good man, Samuel Reed. I saw that the moment you ran into our burning kitchen to help. Catherine could do far worse, and she likely would have back in Philadelphia where the young men are all polish and no substance. You have my blessing, with the understanding that you will treat her well." "I will," Samuel promised, "with my life." "Good. Now let us eat this beautiful bird before it gets cold." They had a wonderful meal together, the three of them, and it felt like family to Samuel in a way nothing had since his parents died. Mabel regaled them with gossip from church about who was courting whom and which rancher had gotten into which dispute. Samuel shared news from the mountains about game movements and weather predictions. Catherine told them about her progress with the ledgers at the general store and how Mr. Peterson had praised her organizational skills. "You could teach her your bookkeeping, too," Mabel suggested to Samuel. "A skill like that would be useful for managing household accounts in any business ventures." "I do not have much to keep books on," Samuel said with a laugh, "but the principle is sound. Catherine, if you are interested, I can show you how I track my trap lines and hunting yields. It is basic but effective." "I would like that," Catherine said. "I want to learn everything about your life, Samuel. If I am to share it someday, I should understand it." Over the next several weeks, Samuel became a regular fixture at the Thornton cabin. He came for meals several times a week, always bringing meat or fish or wild greens he had foraged. He patiently taught Catherine to cook, and slowly but surely her skills improved. She learned to make biscuits that were fluffy instead of charred, stews that were savory instead of burned, beans that were tender instead of raw. More importantly, she learned confidence. Samuel watched her blossom, becoming more assured in the kitchen and in herself. She stopped flinching every time the stove crackled and stopped assuming every dish would be a disaster. She still made mistakes, but she learned to laugh at them instead of despairing. As winter deepened, Samuel found himself torn between his mountain cabin and the warm welcome of the Thornton homestead. He continued to check his trap lines and maintain his property, but his heart was increasingly down in the valley with Catherine. They spent long evenings talking by the fire, learning everything about each other. Samuel told her about his dreams of someday having a small ranch, raising horses perhaps, though he lacked the capital to start. Catherine shared her secret desire to open a small library or bookshop someday, though she knew it was impractical in such a sparsely populated area. "Why is it impractical?" Samuel challenged. "Bozeman is growing. More families are settling in the valley every year. People need books, need knowledge, need entertainment during the long winters. You could start small, maybe just lending out books at first." Catherine's eyes lit up. "Do you really think it could work?" "I think you could make anything work," Samuel said honestly. "You just need to believe in yourself the way I believe in you." One bitterly cold evening in January, Samuel arrived at the cabin to find Catherine in tears and Mabel pacing angrily in the kitchen. "What happened?" Samuel demanded, alarm shooting through him. "That horrible man," Mabel spat. "That Mr. Griggs from the bank in town? He came by today demanding payment on a loan I did not even know existed. Apparently my late husband borrowed money to expand the homestead before he died, and now they want it repaid immediately." Samuel felt his protective instincts surge. "How much?" $300, Mabel said hopelessly. "I do not have $300. I barely have 30. If I cannot pay, they will foreclose on the property and we will have nowhere to go." Samuel's mind raced. $300 was a significant sum, but not impossible. His furs from the winter trapping were prime quality this year. With what he had saved already and what he could get for the pelts, he could likely come up with most of the money, but it would wipe out everything he had been saving toward his dream of a small ranch. He looked at Catherine's tear-stained face, at the despair in her eyes, and he knew without hesitation what he had to do. "I have money saved," he said quietly, "and furs I can sell. I can cover it." Both women stared at him. "Samuel, no," Catherine said immediately. "That is too much. We cannot ask that of you." "You are not asking. I am offering." Samuel took her hands in his. "Catherine, what good is money if I cannot use it to help the people I love? You and your aunt will not lose your home. I will not allow it." "But your dreams," Catherine protested. "Your ranch." "We'll still be there later," Samuel said firmly. "These dreams can wait. Family cannot." Mabel wiped her eyes, clearly moved. "You consider us family?" "Yes, ma'am, I do." Samuel looked at Catherine. "If you will have me, I would like to marry Catherine this spring. That would make us family in truth. But even if she changes her mind, I will still help you. You have shown me more kindness and welcome than I have known in years. Let me do this." Catherine threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. "I will not change my mind," she said, her voice muffled. "I love you, Samuel Reed. I think I have loved you since the moment you burst through that door to save us from my disastrous biscuits." Samuel held her tight, his heart swelling with emotions he could barely name. "I love you too, Catherine, more than I thought I could love anyone." The next day, Samuel rode into Bozeman with his winter's catch of furs and the money he had saved. He sold the pelts to the trading post for top dollar, negotiated fiercely to get every penny they were worth. Then he went to the bank and made Mabel's loan payment in full, adding an extra $50 to the account to give them a cushion for future expenses. Mr. Griggs, the banker, looked surprised to see the backwoods trapper counting out such a significant sum. "This is quite unexpected, Mr. Reed. Mrs. Thornton said nothing about having a benefactor." "I'm going to be her nephew by marriage come spring," Samuel said coolly. "Family takes care of family. And Mr. Griggs, if you have any other surprise demands to make regarding this property, I suggest you make them now while I am here to address them. I do not want my future wife and her aunt harassed." Griggs had the grace to look uncomfortable. "There are no other outstanding debts. The late Mr. Thornton's account is now settled in full." "Good." Samuel tipped his hat and walked out, feeling lighter despite having just spent nearly everything he owned. Money could be earned again. Peace of mind for the woman he loved was priceless. When he returned to the cabin and told them the loan was paid, Mabel actually cried. "You are an angel, Samuel Reed, a true angel." "Just a man trying to do right by the people he cares about," Samuel said, embarrassed by her effusive gratitude. That evening, he and Catherine walked outside despite the cold, needing a moment alone. Catherine was bundled in her warmest cloak, and Samuel pulled her close to share his body heat. "You sacrificed your dreams for us," Catherine said quietly. "I do not know how to thank you." "You can thank me by marrying me as soon as the weather breaks," Samuel said. "I'm tired of going back to an empty cabin every night. I want you in my life, in my home, by my side, always." "Yes," Catherine said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you the moment we can arrange it. Samuel, I promise I will be the best wife I can be. I will keep learning to cook and keep house and do whatever I need to do to be worthy of your sacrifice." Samuel tilted her face up to his. "You are already worthy, Catherine. You do not need to earn my love. You have it freely, completely, forever." They kissed there under the stars, sealing their promise to each other. Samuel felt the rightness of it down to his bones. This was what he had been missing in his mountain solitude, this connection, this partnership, this love. The rest of the winter passed in a blur of preparation. Samuel began building an addition onto his cabin, expanding it to create a proper bedroom and a larger living area. He wanted Catherine to be comfortable, to have space of her own. He built shelves for the books he knew she would acquire, installed a larger stove suitable for cooking for a family. He made furniture with his own hands, a sturdy table and chairs, a bed frame for the softest mattress they could afford. Catherine, meanwhile, threw herself into learning every domestic skill she could. She practiced cooking until even her most complicated dishes turned out edible. She learned to preserve food, to churn butter, to bake bread that was actually light and fluffy. But Mabel taught her to spin wool and weave, skills that would be valuable in their remote mountain home. "You're going to be so isolated up there," Mabel said worriedly one afternoon as she watched Catherine practice her weaving. "Are you certain you can handle it?" "I am certain," Catherine said firmly. "Aunt Mabel, I will miss you terribly, but I love Samuel. Where he is, that is where I belong. Besides, it is only 5 miles. We can visit regularly." "You had better," Mabel said gruffly. "You are the only family I have left." "We could always build you a small cabin near ours," Catherine suggested. "Samuel mentioned there is space on his property. Then you would be close by but still have your independence." Mabel's eyes brightened at the suggestion. Now that is an idea worth considering. These old bones do not enjoy being alone as much as they used to. When Catherine mentioned the idea to Samuel, he immediately agreed. "It makes perfect sense. Your aunt is getting older, and she should not be alone if she does not want to be. We can build her a small place this summer, something cozy and easy to maintain. It would be good to have her nearby." As March arrived and the worst of the winter began to break, Samuel and Catherine started planning their wedding in earnest. They wanted something simple, just a ceremony at the small church in Bozeman with a few friends as witnesses. Catherine had no family besides Mabel, and Samuel had no one except the few trappers and hunters he knew from the trading post. But when word spread through the valley that the mountain man who had paid off Mabel Thornton's loan was marrying her niece, the community responded with unexpected warmth. Women Catherine barely knew stopped by the cabin to offer help with her wedding dress. Men Samuel had only nodded to at the trading post offered to help with the cabin addition. The pastor's wife organized a small reception after the ceremony, insisting that every wedding deserved a celebration. "People are being so kind," Catherine said, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. "I had no idea." "You helped save the Thornton homestead," Mabel explained. "In a community this small, that matters. People help those who help others. You and Samuel have shown yourselves to be good folk. And good folk are valued out here." The wedding was set for the first Saturday in April. The night before, Samuel stayed at the cabin of a fellow trapper, honoring the tradition that the groom should not see the bride before the ceremony. He barely slept, too excited and nervous about the coming day. When he arrived at the church the next morning, dressed in new clothes he had bought special for the occasion, his hair neatly trimmed and his beard shaped, he felt like he might jump out of his skin with anticipation. And then Catherine appeared at the back of the church on Mabel's arm, and Samuel forgot to breathe. She was beautiful. Her dress was simple, made of cream-colored wool with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Her auburn hair was swept up with small wildflowers tucked into the arrangement. But it was her smile that struck Samuel most, radiant and full of joy and love and promise. She walked down the short aisle, and Samuel met her halfway, unable to wait. He took her hand, and together they stood before Pastor Williams. "Dearly beloved," the pastor began, but Samuel barely heard the words. He was too focused on Catherine, on the way her hand trembled slightly in his, on the tears of happiness shining in her eyes. When it came time for the vows, he spoke his clearly and firmly, meaning every word. "I, Samuel Reed, take you, Catherine Thornton, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, cherish you, and protect you, in sickness and in health, in plenty and in want, for all the days of my life." Catherine's voice shook with emotion as she repeated her vows, but she did not falter. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel pulled Catherine into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, to the cheers and applause of the assembled guests. The reception at the church hall was a joyful affair. There was food in abundance provided by many hands, and music from a fiddler who lived in the valley. Samuel danced with his new wife, holding her close and marveling at how his life had changed in just a few short months. "Happy, Mrs. Reed," he murmured into her ear. "Happier than I ever thought possible, Mr. Reed," Catherine replied, laughing. As the sun began to set, Samuel and Catherine said their goodbyes and set off for their mountain cabin. Mabel had decided to stay in town for the night, giving them privacy. Samuel had brought his wagon, and Catherine's belongings were loaded in the back, but everything she owned in the world now combined with his. The journey to the cabin took a couple of hours, darkness falling as they climbed higher into the mountains. But Samuel knew the path by heart, and the horses were sure-footed. Catherine sat close beside him, her hand in his, content to be quiet and watch the stars emerge overhead. When they finally reached the cabin, Samuel lifted Catherine down from the wagon and then, on impulse, swept her up into his arms to carry her over the threshold. She laughed in surprise and delight, her arms coming around his neck. "Welcome home, Catherine," Samuel said softly, setting her down inside. Catherine looked around the cabin, taking in the improvements he had made. The furniture he had built, the shelves waiting for her books, the curtains he had awkwardly attempted to hang on the windows. "It is perfect," she whispered. "Samuel, it is absolutely perfect." That night, they began their life together in truth. Samuel was gentle and patient with his bride, showing her without words how much he loved her, how precious she was to him. Catherine responded with trust and passion, and when they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, both were certain they had found exactly where they belonged. The first weeks of marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Catherine had to learn to manage a mountain homestead, which was different from the valley cabin in many ways. Water had to be carried from the stream. Wood for the stove had to be chopped daily. In the higher altitude, even simple tasks took more effort, but Catherine adapted better than Samuel had dared hope. She rose early each morning to start the fire and make breakfast, and though she still occasionally burned things or let the coffee boil over, more often than not the food was good. She kept the cabin clean and organized, brought beauty to their home with wildflowers and carefully arranged stones. She mended his clothes and kept the ledgers for his trapping business with precision. And in the evenings, after the work was done, they would sit together and talk or read aloud from the few books they had. Sometimes Samuel would take Catherine outside to look through his homemade telescope, showing her the moons of Jupiter and the rings of Saturn, the craters of the moon, and the distant galaxies beyond their own. Catherine would listen with rapt attention, asking questions that showed she truly wanted to understand. "Ma, you are the best student I have ever had," Samuel told her one night as they lay in bed, her head resting on his chest. "That is because I have the best teacher," Catherine replied. "You never make me feel stupid, even when I ask silly questions or make mistakes." "Your questions are never silly," Samuel assured her. "Curiosity is a gift, not a flaw." As spring turned to summer, they fell into comfortable rhythms. Samuel taught Catherine to hunt and fish, and though she would never be as skilled as he was, she learned enough to contribute. Catherine planted a garden near the cabin, vegetables and herbs that would supplement their diet and make their meals more varied. Together they built the small cabin for Mabel, who moved up to the mountain in late June, delighted to be closer to her niece while still maintaining her independence. Having Mabel nearby was a blessing for all of them. She provided companionship for Catherine when Samuel had to be away, checking trap lines or hunting. She was also a wealth of knowledge about traditional medicine and preserving food, skills she passed on to her eager student. The three of them would often share meals, trading stories, and laughter. One warm July evening, as Samuel and Catherine sat outside their cabin watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink, Catherine made an announcement that would change everything. "Samuel, I have something to tell you," she said, her hand resting on her stomach in an unconscious gesture. Samuel immediately understood. "You are with child," he said, wonder and joy flooding through him. "Yes," Catherine confirmed, tears streaming down her cheeks. I have suspected for a few weeks, but I wanted to be certain. Samuel, are you happy? I know we have only been married a few months." "Happy?" Samuel pulled her onto his lap, holding her as if she were infinitely precious. "Catherine, I am more than happy. I am blessed beyond measure. You have given me everything I never knew I wanted, a home, a family, a reason to wake up every morning." They sat together as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, planning for the future. They would need to expand the cabin again, add a nursery. They would need more supplies laid in for winter, as Catherine would be heavy with child by then. Samuel would need to trap and hunt even more to ensure they had enough money for any medical needs. The pregnancy progressed well. Catherine bloomed with health, her skin glowing and her energy seemingly boundless. Mabel was thrilled at the prospect of a baby to dote on, already knitting tiny blankets and clothes. Samuel became even more protective, if that was possible, insisting Catherine rest more and not overexert herself. "Samuel, I am not made of glass," Catherine protested one afternoon when he tried to stop her from carrying water from the stream. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my wife," Samuel said stubbornly. "My wife is special, and I will not risk her or our child." Catherine softened at his obvious concern. "I promise to be careful, but I also need to stay strong and active. The midwife in town said exercise is good for the baby." They compromised. Ian with Catherine continuing most of her normal activities, but allowing Samuel to take over the heavier tasks. As her belly grew, Samuel found himself constantly marveling at the miracle of new life. He would place his large hand on her stomach and feel the baby kick, overwhelmed by the reality that he was going to be a father. Winter came again, Catherine's pregnancy making the cold months more challenging. She was due in late February, and as the time grew near, Samuel became increasingly anxious. He insisted Mabel move into their cabin so she would be there to help, and he rode into Bozeman to fetch the midwife, Mrs. Cooper, asking her to come stay with them for the last few weeks of Catherine's confinement. "I want every precaution taken," Samuel told the midwife. "Money is no object. Whatever you need, whatever Catherine needs, and I will provide it." Mrs. Cooper, an experienced woman who had delivered hundreds of babies, patted his arm kindly. "Your wife is healthy and strong, Mr. Reed. I expect no complications, but I will stay and monitor her progress if it gives you peace of mind." Catherine went into labor on a bitterly cold February night. Samuel paced the cabin like a caged wolf as the women attended to his wife. He could hear Catherine's labored breathing and occasional cries of pain, and it took all his willpower not to burst into the bedroom to be with her. "Let him in," he heard Catherine say at one point. "I want Samuel." Mrs. Cooper opened the door. "Your wife wants you, but you must stay calm and be supportive. Can you do that?" "Yes," Samuel said without hesitation. He went to Catherine's side, taking her hand. When she was sweating and pale, but she smiled when she saw him. "I'm glad you are here," she panted. "I need you." "I'm not going anywhere," Samuel promised. He stayed with her through the long night, holding her hand, wiping her face with a cool cloth, whispering encouragement when the pains became intense. He had faced bears and wolves and bitter winters without flinching, but watching the woman he loved in pain was the hardest thing he had ever done. As dawn broke over the mountains, their son came into the world with a lusty cry. Mrs. Cooper cleaned the baby and wrapped him in blankets, then placed him in Samuel's arms. "You have a fine, healthy boy, Mr. Reed," she announced, "and your wife did beautifully." Samuel looked down at his son, at the tiny face and impossibly small fingers, and felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Catherine, look what we made." Catherine, exhausted but radiant, smiled up at them. What should we name him? They had discussed names but never settled on one. Now, holding his son and looking at his wife, Samuel knew. "James," he said, "after my father, James Thornton Reed." "Perfect," Catherine agreed sleepily. "Hello, James. Welcome to the world." The next weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and learning how to care for an infant. Samuel discovered he had a natural talent for soothing the baby, his deep voice and large, gentle hands calming James when nothing else would. He would walk the floor at night, his son cradled against his broad chest, singing old songs his mother had taught him. Catherine recovered quickly from the birth, her natural resilience serving her well. She took to motherhood with the same determination she had brought to learning to cook, refusing to be discouraged when things were difficult. When James would not nurse well, she persisted. When he cried for hours with colic, she paced and rocked and never lost her patience. "You are an amazing mother," Samuel told her one night as he watched her nurse their son, her face soft with love as she looked down at the baby. "I'm learning, just like I learned everything else," Catherine said. "But this time, the stakes are so much higher. I have to get this right." "You are getting it right," Samuel assured her. "Look at him. He is healthy and happy and loved. What more could a child need?" As winter faded into spring and James grew from a tiny newborn into a chubby, smiling baby, Samuel and Catherine settled into their new roles as parents. The love between them only deepened, strengthened by the bond of the family they had created together. One evening in May, when James was 3 months old and sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Samuel and Catherine sat outside watching the stars emerge. Catherine leaned against her husband, content and peaceful. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Giving up your solitude, your independence, for this life?" Samuel looked at her in surprise. "Not for a single moment. Catherine, before I met you, I was not truly living. I was existing, going through the motions, hiding from the pain of past disappointments. You brought me back to life. You and James are the best things that ever happened to me." "Even though I still sometimes burn dinner?" Catherine teased. Samuel laughed. "Even though I notice you burn far fewer meals now than you did a year ago." "I had a good teacher," Catherine said, tilting her face up for a kiss which Samuel happily provided. The years that followed were filled with joy and hardship in equal measure, as all lives are. Samuel's trapping business thrived, and he expanded into hunting and eventually into trading goods between the mountain settlements and Bozeman. Catherine's dream of bringing books to the frontier was realized in a small way when she started a lending library from their home, with people riding for miles to borrow from her growing collection. 2 years after James was born, Catherine delivered a daughter they named Elizabeth after Samuel's mother. 3 years after that, another son arrived, whom they called Thomas. The cabin expanded again to accommodate their growing family, and Samuel built a larger barn and stable for the horses he had begun raising. Mabel lived to see all 3 of her great-nieces and nephews born, delighting in them until her peaceful passing at age 72. They buried her on the mountain she had come to love, in a spot overlooking the valley where wildflowers bloomed every summer. Through it all, Samuel and Catherine's love remained constant. They had their disagreements and difficulties, as any couple does, but they always came back to the foundation of respect and partnership they had built from the beginning. Samuel never stopped being amazed by his wife's strength and resilience. Catherine never stopped being grateful for her husband's steadiness and devotion. As their children grew, Samuel taught them everything he knew about the mountains and the wilderness. James became an excellent tracker and hunter. Elizabeth had her mother's way with books and learning, eventually becoming a teacher herself. Thomas inherited his father's skill with horses and built on it, becoming a renowned horse breeder whose animals were sought after throughout the territory. Catherine never did become a truly expert cook, though she improved considerably over the years. But Samuel still enjoyed cooking for his family, and it became their tradition that he would make Sunday dinner each week, creating elaborate meals that brought them all together around the table. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Samuel and Catherine rode up to the highest point on their property, a spot they had named Summit Rock. From there, they could see for miles in every direction the valley where they had first met, the mountains that had become their home, the trails their children followed as they began their own adventures in life. 20 years, Catherine said wonderingly. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you burst into Aunt Mabel's kitchen to save me from my disastrous biscuits." Samuel put his arm around her, pulling her close. "Best disaster that ever happened to me." "Do you remember how you used to cook for me because I was hopeless?" Catherine asked with a smile. "You were so patient, so kind. I fell in love with you over those cooking lessons." "I fell in love with you the moment I saw you standing in that smoke-filled kitchen, determined to keep trying, even though you clearly had no idea what you were doing," Samuel confessed. You had such courage, such spirit. I knew you were special." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the mountains in a blaze of crimson and gold. Their children were grown, or nearly so, building their own lives. The homestead was prosperous and secure. They had weathered storms both literal and figurative, had faced loss and celebrated triumph, had built a life together that was richer than either had imagined possible. "What do you think comes next?" Catherine asked. "Now that the children are leaving?" Samuel considered this. "I think we go back to where we started. Just you and me, rediscovering each other without the demands of raising a family. I think we travel, see some of the places we have always talked about. And I think we keep loving each other every single day, the way we have for 20 years. "That sounds perfect," Catherine said softly, "though I am glad we will not have to survive on my cooking alone." Samuel laughed, the sound echoing across the mountains. "I will always cook for you, Catherine. That is part of how I show my love." They rode back to the cabin as darkness fell, their horses picking their way carefully down the familiar path. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, and the smell of bread baking filled the air. Elizabeth had stayed to prepare dinner while they were gone, and the family gathered around the table as they always did, sharing food and conversation and laughter. Looking around at the faces of his children, at his wife's smile, at the home they had built together, Samuel felt overwhelming gratitude for the day he had seen smoke rising from a valley cabin and run to help. That single act of instinct had changed the entire course of his life, had given him everything he held dear. Catherine caught his eye across the table and smiled, that same radiant smile that had captured his heart 2 decades ago. And Samuel smiled back, knowing that of all the adventures he had had in his life as a mountain man, falling in love with a woman who could not cook a single meal without disaster had been the greatest adventure of all. Years continued to pass in their mountain paradise. Samuel and Catherine did travel, taking trips to Denver and even once back to Philadelphia, so Catherine could show her husband where she had grown up. They spent long winters reading by the fire, and long summers tending their expanded gardens and watching their grandchildren begin to arrive. James married a rancher's daughter and settled nearby, giving them 2 grandsons who loved to visit their grandfather and learn the ways of the wilderness. Elizabeth married a doctor and moved to Bozeman, where she opened a school. Thomas married his childhood sweetheart and took over the horse breeding operation, expanding it into one of the finest in the territory. On their 30th anniversary, Samuel surprised Catherine by finally saving enough to build the proper library she had always dreamed of. It was attached to their cabin, a beautiful room with floor-to-ceiling shelves and large windows that let in the mountain light. Catherine cried when she saw it, overwhelmed by her husband's thoughtfulness. "You never forgot," she whispered, running her hands over the smooth wood shelves. "After all these years, you remembered my dream." "I remember everything about you," Samuel said simply. "Every hope, every dream, every fear. You are written on my heart, Catherine." The library became a gathering place for the community, people coming from miles around to borrow books and share news. Catherine held reading circles for children and discussion groups for adults. It became her legacy, this gift of knowledge and story shared freely with all who sought it. As they entered their 4th decade together, both Samuel and Catherine began to slow down. Samuel's hair had gone completely gray, though he was still powerfully built and capable of hard work. Now Catherine's auburn hair had silver threads throughout, and she moved with less ease than in her youth, but her eyes still sparkled with intelligence and humor. They celebrated their 40th anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The cabin that had once been a simple bachelor homestead now presided over a compound of buildings, home to multiple generations of the Reed family. "You have built something remarkable," the pastor said during the anniversary celebration. "Not just a family, but a community. You two have shown everyone what love and commitment can create." That night, after all the guests had gone home, Samuel and Catherine sat outside under the stars as they had done so many times before. Catherine's head rested on Samuel's shoulder, and his arm was around her waist, all holding her close. "Do you remember what you said to me that first time we were alone?" Catherine asked, "when you were teaching me to cook?" "I said a lot of things," Samuel replied with a chuckle. "Which particular wisdom are you recalling?" "You said that mistakes are how we learn, that the key is not to be afraid of them." Catherine lifted her head to look at him. That turned out to be true about more than just cooking. It was true about our whole life together. We made mistakes, both of us, but we learned from them. We kept trying, kept growing. We did, Samuel agreed, and I would not change a single moment, even the hard ones. They all led us here, to this life, to this family. Catherine kissed him softly. I love you, Samuel Reed. I have loved you from the moment you rushed into that smoke-filled kitchen to save me, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Catherine Reed, Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. You turned my whole world upside down in the best possible way. You taught me that being strong does not mean being alone, that opening your heart is not weakness, but the greatest courage. They sat together under the vast Montana sky, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that exceeded either of their dreams. The mountain man who had preferred solitude had discovered that love was worth any risk, any sacrifice. The city girl who could not cook a single meal without disaster had learned that home was not a place but a person, and that person was Samuel. As the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient dance, and the pine-scented wind whispered through the trees, Samuel and Catherine held each other close, grateful for every single day they had been given together. Their love story had started with smoke and burned biscuits, with a desperate woman and a patient man willing to teach. It had grown into something neither had imagined possible, a partnership of equals, a meeting of souls, a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. And in the morning, Samuel would make breakfast as he always did, cooking for the woman he loved. Catherine would sit at the table and watch him with adoring eyes, still learning after all these years, still grateful for his patience and kindness. They would share the meal together, just the two of them in their mountain cabin, and they would plan for another day, another adventure, another chapter in their remarkable story. Because this was the truth Samuel and Catherine had discovered together. Love is not about perfection. It is about finding someone who sees your flaws and loves you anyway, who stands beside you through triumphs and disasters alike. It is about building something together that neither could create alone. It is about choosing each other day after day, year after year, no matter what life brings. And they had chosen each other from that very first day, when a mountain man had cooked for a woman who could not boil water without catastrophe, and in doing so had discovered his heart's true home.